At 7:52 on a Wednesday morning, an all-staff notice froze every budget and hiring approval at Hartwell Yield company-wide, pending an internal equity review. I was $698,000 into a home equity loan that had covered my daughter's last 2 years of college, and I read that notice standing at my own kitchen counter in Stamford, still in the t-shirt I sleep in. I checked my watch out of habit. The same cracked-faced analog piece I'd bought myself the week I started at Hartwell, 13 years ago, the crystal chipped now from a decade of server room railings and conference table edges. My name is Frank Osborne. I'm 54, and for 13 years I was the principal architect behind the revenue and operations systems that kept this company's numbers honest. 16 days earlier, in a quarterly review with 2 directors watching, I'd asked management to explain why 3 newcomers were starting above my own pay, and been told, flatly, that policy was policy. The corporate language for the freeze was a routine compliance pause pending internal review. The plain language reality was that nobody upstairs could approve so much as a purchase order until an auditor finished reading a disclosure I'd filed, alone, at my kitchen table, the same week they'd told me to accept my number or leave. I hadn't leaked anything. I hadn't hacked a system, deleted a record, or told a single reporter, competitor, or regulator anything that wasn't already mine to say through channels the company itself required. I'd simply filed an accountability disclosure, a form Hartwell's own audit policy had required every system's owner to keep current, and that nobody had checked against reality since before I'd been promoted into owning it. The disclosure wasn't dramatic. It was a complete, accurate list of every revenue workflow, every compliance touchpoint, and every system dependency that ran through my desk and no one else's. I'd been quietly maintaining an incomplete version of it for years, the way everyone did, because an accurate one had never once been asked for. This time, I filed the real one, the full version, not the abbreviated one 3 prior audits had waved through without reading past the summary page. I want to be clear about the order of events, because the version leadership told the board afterward wasn't quite the version that happened. I didn't file that disclosure in anger. I filed it on the Friday 4 days after the meeting where I'd been told, in front of 2 other directors, that my compensation reflected policy and that I was welcome to accept it or leave. I didn't raise my voice in that room. I didn't threaten anyone or ask for a number on the spot. I asked one question, whether the same policy applied to the 3 newcomers whose starting salaries I'd seen, by accident, in a shared planning spreadsheet the week before, and I was told the conversation was over. I set my coffee down next to the watch on the counter and read the freeze notice a second time. Somewhere in a Hartwell conference room 40 minutes from my kitchen, a compliance committee was reading the same document, cross-referencing it against 3 years of pay bans, and discovering that the policy they'd used to explain my number to my face had never once accounted for what I actually held together. Nobody in that boardroom, as far as I could tell, had known my name was still the only signature on the one document nobody upstairs had ever actually thought to check against reality. To understand why that freeze notice mattered, you have to understand what my desk actually touched. For 13 years I sat at the center of Hartwell Yield's revenue recognition pipeline, the system that turned signed contracts into recognized revenue into board-ready numbers, and board-ready numbers into the figure analysts quoted every quarter. I didn't need a dashboard to tell me when a batch job had run wrong. After that many years, I could tell by the shape of the reconciliation report before I'd read a single line of it. A column 0.5% off in the wrong direction meant a timing error. A full % off meant someone downstream had touched a mapping table they didn't understand. That morning, 3 weeks before the freeze, I walked the Stamford office floor the way I did most mornings, watch on my wrist. Checking in on the overnight batch runs the way another man might check the weather. I pulled up the reconciliation report on the 3rd floor terminal, scanned it top to bottom in under 2 minutes, and stopped on a line item in the mid-market segment. Recognized revenue up 0.4% against forecast, nothing anyone else would have flagged. I traced it back myself. A new sales rep's contracts were being mapped through a temporary onboarding workflow that should have closed out weeks earlier. I fixed the mapping before the batch ran again that night, logged the change under my own name, and moved on without telling a soul. Nobody would ever know a board-level reporting error hadn't happened, because I'd caught it at 7:40 in the morning with a cup of coffee still too hot to drink. Osamu Endo caught me at the coffee station on my way back. He'd run finance operations before revenue systems came under my desk, and he still reviewed every reconciliation report by hand in a green ledger book he refused to digitize. "You're the only one left who reads these things line by line, Frank," he said, not looking up from the ledger. I didn't answer. I just refilled my cup and kept walking. None of that mastery came free. I'd missed 2 of my daughter's college move-in weekends chasing quarter-end close, and I'd spent more Sunday nights than I could count on a laptop at my kitchen table instead of watching a game with my wife, because a broken revenue mapping on a Monday morning was the kind of thing that showed up in front of the board by Wednesday. I never once mentioned that to anyone at Hartwell. It wasn't the company's business, and a man who explains his sacrifices out loud usually stops being trusted to make them quietly. What ran through my desk wasn't glamorous. Contract-to-cash workflows. Revenue recognition rules tied to accounting standards nobody outside finance had ever read. Compliance touchpoints that fed straight into the annual audit without anyone upstairs knowing my name was attached to half of them. Executives only knew the numbers came out clean every quarter. They never asked who kept them that way. The same way people trust a bridge without asking who calibrated the load bearings underneath it. That was 13 years of the arrangement. I showed up, I reconciled, and the board never had to think about what happened if the person who understood the mapping table stopped showing up. Nobody had ever needed to ask. My name was listed as the accountable owner on every compliance touchpoint in the system, and compliance touchpoints, unlike compensation bands, don't forget who's been signing off on them. Nikhil Wadhwa had been Hartwell's chief people officer for 2 years when I first asked him a question he didn't want to answer. It was a Monday, 3 weeks before the meeting that ended things, tablet already open to the compensation band deck. He swiped to a slide before I'd finished sitting down. "I wanted to talk about the new hires in revenue operations," I said. "Specifically the starting numbers. The bands are the bands, Frank." He turned the tablet toward me, a column of ranges I couldn't fully read upside down. Market compression. Entry-level revenue ops talent got expensive fast this year. I'm not asking about entry-level. I'm asking why 2 of them are starting above where I am, after 13 years. He didn't flinch. Compression works both directions. New market data comes in. We have to price to it immediately, or we lose the candidate. Existing comp gets reviewed on its own cycle. When's my cycle? Same as everyone's. Annual, next spring. He tapped the tablet closed. I know this feels personal. It isn't. It's just how the bands work now. It's not personal to you, I said. It's personal to the number in my account. He smiled the way people smile when they've already decided the conversation is over. Frank, you're one of the most valuable people in this building. But I can't retroactively true up 13 years of comp because the market moved on 2 new hires. I'm not asking you to true up 13 years. I'm asking if the band you're citing to me is the same band you cited to them. For the first time, he paused. I'd have to check. Check, I said. I'll wait. It's not that simple, Frank. It's 1 number and 1 date. That's simple. There are context factors, role scope, market segment, negotiation leverage at time of offer. None of that existed 13 years ago. There was no market yet for what I do. I built it. He set the tablet down flat, which I'd later learn was his tell. I hear you, but I can't make policy exceptions based on tenure sentiment. If I open that door for you, I open it for 40 other long-tenured employees by Friday. I'm not asking you to open a door for 40 people. I'm asking if my band is the band you're using for everyone, or the band you're using for me. They're the same band. Then it should take 30 seconds to confirm, not a review cycle. He didn't check that day. He walked me to the door, one hand light on my shoulder, and said he'd circle back once the review cycle opened. I already knew what that meant. Walking back to my desk, I turned over a harder question. How many years does a person owe an employer before honesty about their own worth starts sounding like an accusation? I didn't like the answer I didn't have. This channel is still finding its audience. Every person who stays through a story like mine is the reason there's another one tomorrow. I didn't argue further. Arguing with a man who's decided the band is the answer never changes what the band says. I went back to my desk, pulled up the compensation planning spreadsheet I had legitimate reporting access to for headcount forecasting, and looked, for the first time, at numbers I hadn't gone looking for before. 3 names. 3 starting salaries, comfortably above mine. I closed the file and understood whatever cycle Nikhil thought he controlled. He'd just told me exactly which review would open it early. 3 weeks later, on a Monday morning, I raised it again, this time in the quarterly operations review, in front of 2 other directors and Nichols' own VP of Total Rewards. "I want to put something on the record," I said, when the floor opened for questions. 3 revenue ops hires this quarter started above my current salary, after 13 years in this role. I'd like to understand the policy that produced that outcome. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone already knows the answer and nobody wants to be the one who says it. Nickel didn't look at his tablet this time. "Frank, I don't think this is the right forum for a compensation conversation. You told me 3 weeks ago it would take 30 seconds to confirm the band was the same. It's been 3 weeks. The band is the band," he said. "Market compression on entry-level revenue ops talent has been significant this year. That's not a reflection of your value to this company. Then what number reflects it?" He glanced at the VP of Total Rewards, who said nothing. "I'd encourage you to bring this to your annual review in the spring through the appropriate channel." "This is the appropriate channel. You're both in the room." The VP of Total Rewards finally spoke. "Frank, I want to be sensitive here, but pay conversations in a group setting can create liability for everyone, including you. I'm not asking for a number. I'm asking for the policy in writing. It's proprietary," she said. "Compensation methodology isn't something we circulate broadly." "I'm not asking broadly. I'm the accountable owner on the systems that produce the revenue those bands get measured against. I think I qualify." Nickel cut back in, smoother now. "I hear the frustration. I do. But turning this into a formal grievance in a quarterly review isn't going to get you a faster answer. It's going to get you a slower one, because now legal has to be looped in before anyone can say anything else." "Then loop in legal," I said. "I have nothing to hide from them either." "Frank." His voice stayed level, almost gentle, the tone of a man narrating a decision he'd already made before the meeting started. "I understand this feels unfair, but policy is policy. If you're not comfortable with where your compensation sits, you're free to explore other opportunities. That's genuinely fine. I'd rather you be somewhere you feel valued. Accept it or leave," said calmly, in front of witnesses, in language soft enough nobody in that room would ever put it that way in an email. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or say anything that would let anyone describe me later as difficult. I said, "Understood," closed my notebook, and let the meeting move on. Later that week, in a budget variance report I had every right to see, I found the number behind the policy. Keeping me at my current band instead of market rate saved Hartwell roughly $2 million for $178,000 a year across the handful of long-tenured revenue ops staff quietly kept below the same threshold I was. $2.478 million. That was the precise cost of the policy Nickel had explained to me twice, in front of witnesses, as if it were physics rather than a number someone had chosen. Nobody in that room had asked what it might cost instead to have the one signature on every compliance touchpoint in the revenue system quietly stop trusting the word policy. That Friday, for days after the review meeting, I drove home and sat at the kitchen table with a form I hadn't updated in 3 years. The wristwatch came off first, the way it did every night, and I set it face up on the table before I opened my laptop. Hartwell's audit policy required every systems owner to file an annual accountability and dependency disclosure, a form listing every revenue workflow, compliance touchpoint, and system dependency under that owner's name, certified accurate under penalty of the same internal audit standard that governed our SOX controls. I'd filed a version every year. Like almost everyone who filed one, I'd filed the abbreviated version, the one that listed the systems, not the full map of what actually depended on a single person showing up to run them correctly. This time I filed the real one. I pulled a dog-eared procedure binder down from the shelf in my home office. 3 years of printed runbooks, mapping diagrams, and reconciliation notes I'd kept for my own sanity, never for anyone else, and started translating it, line by line, into the disclosure form. Every revenue workflow that ran through my desk alone. Every compliance touchpoint where my name was the only one listed as accountable owner. Every dependency that had never once been tested with me absent for more than a scheduled vacation. The rule was simple, and I'd known it for 13 years without ever seeing it matter. If a filed disclosure revealed a dependency concentration above a defined threshold, one person accountable for more than a set share of revenue-critical compliance touchpoints. It triggered a mandatory internal equity and continuity review, automatically, no executive discretion required. I'd seen the clause 100 times in training, slides nobody read past the header. I'd never once seen it invoked, because nobody had ever filed a disclosure honest enough to cross the threshold. Mine would cross it by a wide margin. I checked the math twice before I hit submit, the way I'd checked every reconciliation report for 13 years, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted no one, ever, to be able to say the number had been inflated for effect. It hadn't. If anything, I'd rounded conservatively. I wasn't hiding anything or inventing a number. Everything on that form was already true, already documented in the binder on my desk, already something Hartwell's own policy required me to certify accurately once a year. I simply stopped filing the flattering version. Osamu called that night after I'd submitted it. "You're filing the real one," he said. "Not a question. I am. They're not going to like what that triggers." I didn't design the threshold, Osamu. I just finally told the truth about which side of it I'm on. He was quiet for a moment. "How long before the review opens?" 8 business days, per the policy. Give or take. And if they try to quietly walk it back before then? They can't, I said. It's automatic once it's filed. That was the whole point of writing it that way in the first place, so it would never depend on someone upstairs remembering to care. I closed the binder, set it beside the watch on the table, and sat there a moment longer than I needed to before turning off the kitchen light. I hadn't sabotaged a single system, deleted a record, or told anyone outside the required channel anything that wasn't already, technically, theirs to have known for years. Nickel called me into his office Wednesday morning, 3 business days after I'd filed, with an offer already loaded on his tablet. "I talked to finance," he said. "We can do a one-time market adjustment. 8%, effective next pay cycle. I think that's a fair resolution to where we landed." 8% of what number? Your current base. That's not parity with the new hires. That's a gesture. It's a meaningful gesture, Frank. And frankly, it's more than the review process would typically authorize outside cycle. He smiled, the tablet still dark, unopened. "I'd like to close this out before it becomes a bigger conversation than it needs to be." "Is there already a bigger conversation happening?" "Not that I'm aware of." He said it easily, the way a man says something he hasn't bothered to check. "I just don't want this dragging into next quarter." "I appreciate the offer," I said. "I'm not in a position to accept it." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not alarm, just mild irritation, the look of a man who'd expected a different scene to play out. "Can I ask why not?" "Because it isn't parity, and because I already filed something Friday that isn't going to be resolved by a one-time adjustment." "Filed what?" "My annual disclosure. The real one." "Is that going to be a problem?" he asked. "That's not really up to me anymore," I said. "It's up to the review threshold. I just filed accurately. You could have talked to me first." "I did talk to you first. Twice. You told me the bands were the bands, both times." He didn't ask a follow-up question after that. I don't think he understood, in that moment, what filing accurately actually meant, and I didn't explain it further. The disclosure wasn't a conversation between the two of us anymore. It was a document sitting in a compliance queue, and explaining it wouldn't move it any faster or slower than policy already required. He told leadership that Friday, according to Sinomori, who sat 2 seats down at the all-hands, that the Frank Osborne situation was basically resolved and would close out formally within the week. Senna said the head of internal audit, beside her, never looked up from her laptop the whole time, already well into a disclosure telling a very different story than resolved. "He kept saying it like saying it made it true," Senna told me. She didn't editorialize beyond that. She didn't need to. She did mention one thing in passing, flat, no particular emphasis. One of the junior auditors, walking past her desk with a coffee, had glanced at the disclosure open on her monitor and muttered, "Somebody's going to need a bigger org chart." Senna hadn't laughed. She just kept reading. I asked her, a few days later, whether anyone above Nickel's level had reviewed the disclosure yet. "Not that I've heard," she said. "But I've stopped assuming silence means nobody's reading. It usually just means they're reading carefully." For 6 days, as far as anyone at Hartwell knew, nothing was happening. Nickel moved to other priorities. The 8% offer sat withdrawn but unmentioned. 3 floors up, A compliance analyst was cross-referencing my disclosure against 3 years of compensation data, finding numbers that had never once been asked to sit next to each other. 8 business days is not a long time when you're counting toward a deadline you know exists. It is considerably longer when you've told everyone in the building the matter is closed. The freeze notice went out at 7:52 that Wednesday morning, 8 business days after I'd filed. Exactly on the schedule the policy had always quietly promised, whether anyone upstairs remembered reading it or not. I was at my own desk when it hit every inbox. All budget and hiring approvals suspended company-wide, pending an internal compliance and equity review. By 8:15, Senna texted from 3 floors up. Audit committee pulled an emergency session. Nobody's saying why out loud yet. By 8:40, a director I barely knew from procurement stopped at my desk, phone in hand. Did you hear anything about this freeze? Nobody in my chain can explain it. I heard the same notice you did, I said, which was true. By 9, Osamu called. They've looped in the external auditor, he said. Not just internal review anymore. The audit committee wants outside eyes on the concentration numbers before anyone signs off on a remediation plan. That's not unusual for a threshold breach this size, I said. Did you know it would trigger this fast? I knew the policy said 8 business days. I didn't write the policy, Osamu. I just finally read it correctly. Frank, do you understand what this is costing them per day? Every unsigned approval, every stalled vendor payment, every hire we can't close. Spread across even 5 business days, this freeze burns through more than $495,000 a day in stalled commitments. The whole $2 million for $178,000 they thought they'd saved lowballing you. Gone in under a week. I didn't set the threshold, Osamu. I just told the truth about which side of it I was on. By 9:30, the floor had the electric hum of a building pretending to work. Phones buzzed against desks nobody was sitting at. 2 procurement analysts stood by the elevators, one rubbing his face the way people do when they've done the math on their own stalled approvals and don't like the number they got. I ate the granola bar I'd packed that morning, on schedule, the same one I ate every Wednesday. By 10, Senna texted again. They've asked audit to pull 3 years of comp data by end of day. This isn't going away quietly. I finished the report in front of me before I replied. By 10:30, Nickel's assistant called my desk directly, voice tight. Nickel would like you to come up to the 4th floor. For what? He didn't say. He said it was urgent. I finished the line I was reconciling first, then walked up, watch on my wrist, past a hallway of lowered voices. Legal was already in Nickel's office, along with someone carrying an auditor's badge. Nobody offered me coffee this time. Frank, Nickel said, standing, his tablet nowhere in sight. We need to talk about the disclosure. I filed it 8 business days ago, I said. I'm surprised it took this long. Is it accurate? Every line. You're welcome to have the auditor verify it against the system logs directly. I'd expect nothing less. The auditor spoke for the first time. We already have. It reconciles. Nickel looked at Legal. Legal looked back at him and said nothing at all, which in that room was its own kind of answer. So what happens now? Nickel finally asked, not quite to anyone. Now the review runs its course, the auditor said. That part isn't optional either. Nobody in the room had a follow-up question after that. The silence that followed told me more than anything said afterward would. The audit committee called me in Friday, 2 days after the freeze, in a conference room I'd never once been invited into before. I brought the binder. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted the room to see, physically, that none of what I'd filed had come from nowhere. 3 years of runbooks and reconciliation notes, dog-eared and underlined, sitting on the polished table like it belonged there more than any tablet in the room did. I set my watch beside it out of habit more than intention, the same cracked face it had worn every ordinary morning for 13 years. The committee chair opened without preamble. Mr. Osborne, the review confirms your disclosure reconciles against system logs. It also confirms a compensation gap between your role and 3 recent hires that internal counsel is calling, and I quote, legally exposed. I appreciate the confirmation, I said. Nickel spoke first. I'd like to say for the record that policy compliance isn't the same as intent to discriminate. The bans were applied consistently to new hire offers. Nothing about this was designed to disadvantage Frank specifically. Nobody's alleging intent, the chair said. We're alleging a pattern your own compliance touchpoints just made impossible to keep calling it technicality. I wasn't going to call it that. You called it that in an email to me Wednesday night. Internal counsel said, flat, not looking up from her notes. Nickel didn't answer that. What does Mr. Osborne want? The chair asked, looking at me directly for the first time. Market rate parity, retroactive to the date the Newcomers started, not the date I complained about it, I said. Formal correction of the disclosure threshold policy, so it can't be quietly walked back after this closes. And I wanted in writing that filing an accurate disclosure isn't something anyone in this building gets treated as retaliation for. Not against me, not against the next person who reads that policy correctly. That's a broad ask, Nichols said. It's shorter than the list of things I could have asked for, I said. I could have asked for damages. I could have asked for your job. I'm not asking for either. Why not? The chair asked, genuinely curious. Because I don't think you fix a company by burning the person who broke the news. I think you fix it by making sure the next person who finds a real problem doesn't have to compile 3 years of evidence in a home office at night to be believed. It's a short list, I said. I didn't ask you to fire anyone. I didn't ask for a settlement to disappear this. I asked for the truth to be the policy going forward, instead of the exception. The chair looked at internal counsel, who nodded once. We can draft that. There's one more thing, I said. I'm not staying. That landed harder than anything else in the room, including the number. You're resigning? Nickel asked, and for the first time all week, he sounded like he meant the question. I'm accepting a role somewhere that doesn't need a compliance threshold to tell it the truth about who's holding it together, I said. You'll have a transition period. I'm not interested in leaving Hartwell broken. I am interested in leaving it honest. I left the binder on the shelf in that conference room when I walked out. Not lost, not forgotten. Exactly where the next auditor who needed it would know precisely where to look. The written agreement landed in my inbox the following Wednesday. Retroactive parity to the Newcomers' start dates. The disclosure policy rewritten with an explicit non-retaliation clause and a 6-week transition. No settlement to sign away the story. No number attached to my silence, because I hadn't asked for one. I gave my notice the same afternoon. Nickel didn't call. On my last morning, walking past the conference room where the review had happened, I saw him through the glass. Alone, no tablet in sight. Reading the binder I'd left on the shelf, turning pages like a man finally reading something he should have read months ago. Senna told me later he'd spent most of that week in meetings with the board's governance committee, explaining a policy he'd apparently never fully read before citing it to my face twice. He kept his title. He lost the thing that made the title mean anything. The assumption, in every room he walked into after that the numbers behind him were as solid as the deck in front of him. I walked the office floor one final time, watch on my wrist, and stopped at the terminal on the 3rd floor out of pure habit. The reconciliation report was clean. It would have been, with or without me there to check it. That was always the point of writing the rule the way I had, years before anyone thought to test it. Between the retroactive parity back pay Hartwell owed me and the multi-year package at the firm I joined next, the total came to $8,050,000, a number I know precisely because I still can't help reconciling things down to the dollar. I started 6 weeks later as Director of Financial Systems Integrity, reporting to a CFO who'd asked what I'd do if I found a problem nobody wanted to hear about. I told her the truth. I'd document it, file it through the proper channel, and let policy do what policy is supposed to do. She hired me the following week. Osamu retired that spring and sends me a card every year on the anniversary of the filing. No note beyond a single line. Still reading the fine print. Senna left compliance at Hartwell 18 months later and now runs internal audit somewhere with better coffee. We still talk. People ask if I regret not asking for more. A bigger settlement, a public apology, Nichols' job. I don't. I never wanted to win an argument about my value. I wanted it to become unnecessary for whoever came after me with a disclosure form and a decision about which version to file. For 13 years, I told myself the abbreviated disclosure was harmless, a formality nobody would read closely enough to matter. It wasn't neutral. It was doing someone a favor every year I filed it quietly. The real one didn't change a fact about my work. It only changed who could keep pretending not to know. Hartwell survived the freeze. Revenue kept recognizing itself correctly, the way it had for 13 years, because the systems never depended on any one person's silence. only on someone's honesty to keep them accountable. The board rebuilt the compensation band methodology from scratch within a year. I heard Nichols sat in on those sessions and said very little. I kept the watch. I never went back for the binder. Some records are worth more sitting where the next person will need to find them than they ever were worth sitting in my own hands.